So, welcome to the review for Mr. Robot, the video game from, 2007. Oh boy. So,
Fox did not enjoy this
hmm?
one. You did not enjoy that one.
So, going off the objective reviews, technically speaking, the game functioned as intended and ran smoothly. However, did the control scheme make sense? Not really. The game is based around using a keyboard until it isn't. In which case, it's based around using a mouse. Likewise, at several points, the game requires 3 commands to work correctly, but there's only 2. Which makes it very difficult to actually play those segments. Likewise, in terms of story, it's basically a modified version of 2005 A Space Odyssey as far as I can tell. To be honest though, I've never played 2005 A Space seen 2005 A Space Odyssey.
The beginning parts, I thought it was very boring.
Fair enough. And in terms of menu appearance, well, the menus where the control scheme falls apart. Because the menus cannot be, functionally used via the keyboard. You have to use the mouse. True subjectively, did I enjoy how the game functioned? No. The game is primarily based around puzzles and RPG-like combat, and Sokoban is a puzzle game where you move crates into positions in order to succeed. The thing is, at a certain point, you see the solution, and the problem is just setting up the solution. This game suffers from that. Likewise, the combat devolved so fast. Basically, at the beginning of the game, you have the grub scrambler and the adult scrambler, and your later, more scramblers and new enemy types get added on. And it falls apart so fast. What does a daemon count as? Do I use crack on it or do I use fire on it? Oh, neither. It's immune to both. So there's no program specifically designed to attack daemons or data masters or whatever that thing is. So many of the enemies by the end of the game don't actually apply to your program attacks, and so your program attacks end up useless. Most enemies can resist them anyways, and why is Brutus, who's not even supposed to be capable of ghost combat to begin with, the strongest ghost in the game? And you have grub scramblers that die in 3 hits and grub scramblers that die in 7 hits and can block 40% of your attacks because they're actually way stronger than average grub scramblers. But you're never told this. It's so hard to tell the strength of things, the power of things. The combat system just no. Which, did I/we think the game was balanced, which is a different one of the things? Yeah, no, it was not. From the fact that it doesn't make any sense that the program specialist, has the weakest armor in the game next to only the communication specialist, which is kind of fair. It's nonsensical. The game looks kind of nice until you stare at the textures too long and realize they all break. The coolant being corrosive makes no sense. Because assumably we're either using that coolant on us or on the ship, and either way, we need to be in contact with it.
Mm-hmm.
The control scheme is WASD, which makes sense, but that's shift and control. To which I changed that to spacebar and E, and it makes no sense regardless of what you put it on. And in combat, the menu system actually requires you to keep pressing down or up to get to the next option, despite the fact that they display them side by side. Which is so confusing. In terms of sound design, oh boy. Kunk, 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 thunk, 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 thunk. You get the same sound effects just over and 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 over with no variation, which isn't very surprising for 2007, but this game is bad. Which is really funny because the entire thing was just gameplay, no gimmicks. That's what Moonpod says at the very beginning. Disagree. Hard disagree. A majority of the puzzles are the exact same gimmick. A majority of the fights are the exact same gimmick. And getting back into the fights, unlike in Final Fantasy, where it's like, oh, I was suffering because I wasn't using items. Using items isn't feasible in this game. Shops aren't guaranteed. Saves aren't guaranteed. The way you heal outside of battles is the currency. The way you restore your lives is the currency. The way you buy things is the currency. But that currency is so sparse and hard to find, and there's no actual way to get more of it guaranteed. And then all of the shops have limited stock, and you can't guarantee where they are. You can't buy new gear. You can't buy items because you don't even know if that shop is selling items.
Yeah.
Add in the fact that the combat system requires you to find the main ghost causing the issues, which is typically the largest, most powerful node, but most of the maps are so big or so sideways, you can't actually see your goal. And you're not told what's better and what's worse. At first, you get the pretty good implication that, oh, it's always the larger thing. No, it's not. It's not. The game is indicative of its era. And it tried really hard, and it fell flat. Most of the most damning piece of evidence that I have for that goes to the crane puzzle. When during the Rasslin dying, I failed that puzzle some 5 times. I was swearing my head up, down, left, right, and center with that one. Because I didn't know how to drop things with the crane as a weapon. Because you literally never do that, ever. You are not taught you can drop things using the crane. You are not taught that you are supposed to release things, drop things from up high, and that suddenly turns them into a weapon during that fight in particular. Because there is actually at one point where you do drop a crate on one robot's head. But you pretty much never get a chance to do that again. And for the most part, you want to hack robots so you can steal information. And get levels and try and get items. But during this place, you had to drop coolant tanks specifically as a weapon because their armored chassis would survive a crate. But you're not told how to drop a coolant tank as a weapon. And to make it worse, Rasslin doesn't shut up. And the same button to drop it as a weapon is tell Rasslin to shut up.
Yeah.
To which I actually had to pull up a guide. I couldn't solve that on my own. I had to pull up a guide.
Not surprising. That room was tricky.
And with the fact that there was Sam's one's forced death, which was just incredibly stupid because what happens if I didn't repair Sam's one then and just left him? Does the game become impossible? Because those pistons were slow. Sam's one had plenty of time to get out of the way. Why did Sam's one of all characters have to die? It happened so fast. That happened over the course of like 40 seconds, dude. It. I could complain for ages. Subjectively, you can tell what I feel about the game. And objectively, I do not feel like it was a good game.
Needed another button.
It needed another button. It needed better sound design. It needed somebody to actually line up all the graphics. And most importantly, it needed different variant appearances for different levels of enemies. Which is actually something they did at the very end of the game. They made it very clear that there were stronger variations of the enemies by putting a floating orb around them. But the problem was, that actually only acted as a clear defining for the strongest version of that enemy. Which was still not true because there were still variations of those enemies and you couldn't tell because there was no difference, like they didn't get more or less orbs. All in all, it's impossible to truly give an objective review of a game, but subjectively, the game was bad. Objectively, the game wasn't good. The end of the game, the beginning of the game is amazing. The end of the game is crap. There's 2 times where there's interesting puzzles, actually introduced new puzzles. Actually, there was one. That was the mini robots. I don't remember their names. The Nex in charge of managing the system or something. I thought that was an interesting puzzle because once you figured it was less reverse Sokobon and more. Well, no, it was still Sokobon. You just had to make sure everything was in the right place for them to walk. But it was still interesting because you had to, at least at that point, it was a new gimmick.
Yeah.
But yeah. Mr. Robot. I don't have anything else to say at this point. I could complain for ages, but that's not an interesting review. Anything you got to say, Mellon?
Not really.
Yeah, fair.